morning, everybody. My name is Corinna Hörst. I'm with the German Marshall Fund, but also Women in International Security. I am German, but I'm based in Brussels, but I'm delighted to be able to be part of a very diverse panel. So may I ask my panelists to join me? Minister Czaputowicz, please, from Poland. Mrs. Pusić from the Balkans, and Minister Rinkēvičs from the Baltics. Please join me on the panel. I am trying to make this a little bit interactive. I will engage the panel into a conversation, but I ask all of you as well to prepare some questions so we can really invite the audience to join us in this conversation. I have been told this session will be a bit shorter, but we'll make the best out of it. So let's get started. The 3C initiative. It's an economic and infrastructure project, but also geopolitical project. It has been around for about 4 years. There have been ideas. There are now 48 projects, and now there are also some actions. Minister Czaputowicz, it's one of your pet projects, so to speak, from your government. So can you briefly tell us where are we at now after the summit in Ljubljana? And I'm particularly interested, I hear there has been a ministerial about shaping now a secretariat. So when it comes to institutionalizing this idea, where are we at?
Thank you. Thank you. I think that it is indeed the project which was created by Poland, Croatia, and also Romania is very much active in this. The aim of this is to, so to say, bring more balance in the development of the European Union. I would not call it as a geopolitical project. It was your question, it was the thesis, it was a statement. I do not see it in that way. In other words, countries belonging to that initiative do not have separate ambitions to play geopolitical, you use the term, role. So the main idea is to strengthen interconnectivity in the region, in Central and Eastern Europe. The membership is limited to the EU member states. I discussed the idea of cooperation with Ukraine, asked by President Zelensky even. Is it possible that Ukraine join the 3C initiative? It's rather not possible at that stage because it is limited to the European Union. The same goes for the Western Balkans. Until these countries join the European Union, only if they join, they may join the 3C initiative. So the idea is very simple. We have to complement current ways, transport links, railways to the level and develop to the level of Western Europe. We are simply less developed, and it is an impediment for the European Union. So the idea is to invest more in infrastructure. It also refers to energy security, and then to play together with the European Union or by the European Union and within the European Union more important role in the world. So it is not a competition with other, so to say, projects, but simply an instrument to help to catch up with the Western Europe.
Okay, and can I just briefly follow up on the institutionalization? There is the idea out to create a secretariat. Can you say something more about that?
Okay, I don't know if secretariat is a good word and maybe even a good idea. I think that institutionalization is very important. I agree with that. In order to be successful in implementing projects we may come up with. And already important decision was taken by Poland, Romania, and other countries to create a fund, 3Cs fund, in order to have a possibility to have synergy in financing using our national money of the member states, of the countries belonging to this initiative, because formally it's not a membership event, then European money and also maybe some external money, some banks coming from, say, United States or other countries. So this fund is crucial because the main idea of this is simply to invest in infrastructure, so you have to have money. Second, there was a meeting last week in Poland, ministerial meeting, the first one organized by Minister of Finance and Development, Jerzy Kwieciński, in Warsaw. Ministers from the member countries took part in this meeting to discuss what next steps should be. I think that now it's time to take ownership of that project, initiated by presidents, by the government, because if you want to have infrastructural projects, you have the institutions responsible for that activity should take ownership. So it is a next step of institutionalizations. Now, in Poland, for example, we created a person within the government responsible for the 3Cs initiative just a few months ago, and we encourage other countries in order to create a network. And this person in Poland is Minister Kwieciński, so very high in the hierarchy of the government. So this is how we see. Now I think it's time that the countries reflect on their institutional framework. We have to come up with the project. The main source of investment will be, or of money, or financing, will be the European Union, but we know the European Union currently is the process of setting up a new commission. So difficult to discuss with the European Union at that stage, but we will have to come up with these projects and ask for financing. Meantime, we should create institutional framework in the countries and persons also responsible for these contacts. We already decided to have next summit in Estonia, so it is a good, it's also a symbolic place after Romania, Black Sea, Slovenia, Adriatic Sea, and now Baltic Sea, Estonia, and we will continue that cooperation.
Okay, thank you. Let me bring in Mrs. Pusić also from a country that was one of the sort of co-founders, and I wanted to push a little bit on this European integration idea. How do you see the C3 initiative really as an instrument of European integration? Yes, we've been talking and we know there is EU funding available for the projects that are being proposed. It is certainly also a way of strengthening the quote-unquote newer EU members in terms of really creating sort of north-south sort of linkages. But beyond that, how can this initiative contribute to the sort of European integration and really also maybe become really part of this Europe in the world idea that's out there?
Thank you. This work, I think it takes some time. Thank you. Thank you very much. I couldn't agree more with Minister Czaputowicz because he makes the whole project sound completely non-controversial. But I think it has been relatively controversial, especially at the beginning, and I would like to sort of lighten up a little bit our discussion. All cooperation is good. There's no doubt about that. But the 3C initiative was also sometimes seen, especially at the beginning, not as complementary with the European integration, but as almost an alternative to the European integration. And this is why it's so important to emphasize its, how can I say, its sort of embeddedness in the European project. We sometimes, even we who are very new, I mean, Croatia is way newer than Poland in the European Union, but still we sometimes tend to think that we can take Europe for granted. I think, if anything, if we needed a wake-up call, it came with Brexit, it came with what's happening right now. So I don't think we can take Europe for granted. And there is no them. There's this famous book of Teresa Taranska, which I think everybody in Poland knows about, called Them, meaning that when you're talking politics, there is always some them there who, when things don't turn out right, are responsible. It's never you. Now, them is us. We are the them of the here and now, of Europe as we see it, Europe as we are going to build it. And I'm talking about this very much aware that this is very much a problem in my own country, thinking now that we are in, everything's fine and it's going to work off itself and on its own. It's not. Europe needs concerted focus and action by all its members, small and big, and new and old. And therefore, I think the 3C initiative has a really important role to play and a really important chance. When it is positioned and when it is understood and when it is led as another strategy for European integration. And as the minister said earlier, we are members of the European Union, but we all have these neighbors who are in our region and who are not going anywhere, and we are not going anywhere in the sense they will always be our neighbors. And we will always depend, regardless of whether they're in the European Union or not, we will always depend for our security, stability, and everything else on these neighbors. This is why I think this 3C initiative is also important, because although it includes only EU member states, we have to take into consideration that, right next to us there is Montenegro, and right there is Albania. You have some, let's say, more serious neighbors here, but that simply has to be part of our thinking. And therefore, I think, for instance, we are not, and the 3C initiative is certainly not the first group of countries that have noticed that this is an important area and region, and that this is a region, because we didn't tend to think of the 3Cs as a region. Chinese were the first to notice, or maybe were early on noticed this with 16+1, thinking, there is this whole Eastern Europe, new member states, they've been a little left behind, let's get in on it. And I'm all for us getting in on it. In other words, the states that actually happen to be the ones who need this catching up to do. But through all that, I think it is crucial. I would say it is the difference between this being good and being bad. The difference between being right and wrong is to understand the 3C initiative as another European integrating factor or strategy.
I think you made a very important point, pointing to the neighbors that all of you have in one way or the other, older EU member states, not yet EU member states, and as Minister Czaputowicz also said, the EU is currently forming its leadership, so I think all of the 3C countries have an opportunity to also really chime in what's happening in Brussels. I want to follow up on a point that you mentioned already. There is a geopolitical dimension to the 3 initiative, especially in the context of economic and political interest in the regions by China and the United States. So, Minister Rinkēvičs, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Some of them are already trying to put a little bit of pressure on some countries and sort of decisions. Will, China offering opportunities through the 16+1 structures, wanting to invest, yet put limited chances on local and economic opportunities because they bring in their own contractors and material and workers, and then there are also security concerns. So how do you see the role of external actors in the region, and how will the C3 initiative sort of position itself and move forward?
Well, thank you. So, thank you very much. I always get the easiest questions. Let me say that, first of all, 3C's initiative, at least from the point of view of Latvia, has three important elements. The first one actually was well covered by Jacek. I think that it is very much about working towards greater integration with Europe, European Union, when it comes to energy, when it comes to transportation networks, also addressing some of the challenges that we all see currently unfolding within the EU framework. The second element is very important because we see that 3C's initiative actually is attracting interest of the United States. We see that at almost all summits, in Bucharest, in Warsaw, I think it was 2 years ago in Warsaw, the 3C's initiative was actually attended by the President, also by high-level cabinet secretaries. It shows that there is an interest when it comes to economic, when it comes to security dimension, particularly actually energy. And for countries like Latvia, the other Baltic states, while we are still struggling with achieving full independence when it comes to gas market, openings like LNG export is very important. And also, of course, it is very important that we have the platform of security dialogue with the United States, especially taking into account what we are seeing as recent developments in the region. The third element, which I believe is also very important, is that we have always seen 3C's initiative as complementary to EU, not as anything kind of contradictory or some kind of alternative building. And to that effect, I think it's also very good to see that Germany is now taking the observer status. We would love to see also this country to be more involved in this kind of deliberation and probably also trying to build some more bridges between Europe and the United States, between big and small powers. And then we have another format that you already mentioned. Actually, it's not 16+1 anymore, it's 17+1, with Greece succeeding in Dubrovnik this year as the full-fledged member. And I think that to some extent, yes, we will have to discuss within 3C's initiative how we are approaching not only economic issues, but also how we can address some of security challenges. But frankly speaking, I think that we are, and by the way, I believe all three nations represented here are members of both 17+1 and 3C's initiative, and I think that we are seeing that now we have more complex, more challenging issues than even 2 years before, with all the issues when it comes to IT security issues, when it comes to 5G issues, when it comes to also addressing some of legitimate security concerns on one hand, but on the other hand, we all understand that we still want to do some, let's say, economic cooperation with China, and we also want to do some economic cooperation with the United States. And of course, we also want to see that the European Union and NATO probably, and at least from Latvia's point of view, also has more coherent strategy addressing some of those challenges that I was just speaking. From that point of view, I think that if we can also get more political discussion among heads of state and government within the 3C's initiative, how we are proceeding, that would be a good thing. But at the same time, I also think that inevitably we are going to face some tough questions, and we will inevitably will have to make some decisions that will have to address some of those issues.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question, but I also wanted to get the audience ready to prepare some questions. I want to push you on a little bit the regional sovereignty issue. You mentioned all of you are part of the 17+1 initiative as well as the 3C initiative. For me, they're very, very different things because the money is coming from somewhere else. So how are you going to maintain sovereignty of your country, of the region, and not have too many foreign powers sort of meddling in your region? The other question I wanted to ask more broadly is, as it's moving forward, how are there things that you personally or from your countryside feel like are not being addressed? Are you missing something that you would like to see within the initiative sort of being much more endorsed or coming up? It's a little bit picking up on Nick Gowing's sort of efforts to, bring out, some of the challenges that were mentioned earlier on. Are there ways to maybe bring them into this initiative? And I leave it open to you which order you want to respond. So.
Yes, I think these are important questions, but we can look at the relations of the countries of our region with different institutions. First of all, say European Union, China, and United States. I do not agree that the initiative was conceived as a kind of a competition to European integration. It is within the European integration, but at the same time, I think that the countries of the region share common vision and common interest, common vision of the European Union. It was visible at the meeting 1st of May this year on the invitation of Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki in Warsaw with 13 countries. We joined the European Union in 2004 and later. So these were mainly countries from the region, but also Malta, for example. Here is the Foreign Minister Carmelo from Malta, and Prime Minister representing Malta was there. And it was very important declaration taken by the heads of states, showing our common vision of the European Union based on competitiveness, ambitious budget, open one towards our neighborhood, maintaining strong transatlantic links. So there is a kind of a common interest which helps to have common position within the European Union. If you look at these countries, they also belong to the friends of cohesion policy within the European Union. So we are for maintaining ambitious budget and traditional policies, cohesion policy and common agricultural policy. So this is a common, this is the base for cooperation. So European Union, we are within the European Union, but we have our ambitions, our vision, and the 3 Cs is one of instruments we want to implement our vision, equally developed. Second, China. The format existed, was set up before the 3 Cs initiative, 16+1, now 17+1, but I think that it is kind of a way to consult with China our policies. In my opinion, we should be more closer to the European Union as an entity, not to be independent from the European Union. We have to coordinate our policy within the European Union vis-à-vis such actors like China. And it is, I think, obvious for everybody. China may not, so to say, play us against the others, and it is understood, but of course it's a very important partner, economic partner. And then the United States, I think that indeed our region is maybe more open for the cooperation with the United States due to our location and also threat perception. So we share threat perceptions. For us, military relations with the United States are more important than from countries in Western Europe. Also energy security, and that is a good base for cooperation. If the United States has the possibility to export liquid gas, we would welcome that in order to diversify supplies. So cooperation with the United States, yes, I think that it is an instrument which may encourage or strengthen these relations because our common interests are similar. Not because we differ within the European Union, that we are more pro-American, probably we are, but it is an objective, so to say, situation and position, using your word, geopolitical location, which forces us to closer cooperation with the United States.
Thank you. Minister Rinkēvičs, you wanted to come in. You raised two fingers.
Well, just a couple of points. First of all, 10 years ago it was quite boring. Being a good European meant also to be a good transatlanticist. Today we see that there are some differences emerging. Well, climate change, some issues on trade, Iran, where EU and United States have some different views. At the same time, I very much agree with Jacek that, in this part of Europe, we don't want to be kind of, seen as, let's say, good American or pro-American guys or good European or pro-European guys, because both are extremely important for security reasons, for economic reasons. So we are actually tended to build bridges rather than to destroy them. And I think that this is something that we should do. And by the way, I believe also the 3Cs initiative could be very helpful in this regard. Second point on China. Look, I think that only this year, and I'm the foreign minister for 8 years, only this year, as far as I remember our discussions at the EU Foreign Affairs Council, we had extremely good strategy session in Bucharest during Gimnich on China, then formal session in March, and then very good European Council meeting where I believe we have been able to forge something that I would say quite successful strategic approach from EU point. How to maintain sovereignty? Look, for us there are 2 points. We understand that small nations cannot deal separately on issues like, let's say, investment screening. That has to be EU-wide policy, and I'm happy to see that this is actually developing. Second, it's our decision how much of strategic assets we want to, let's say, sell. For us, for instance, non-negotiable issue is selling anything in our port infrastructure. So actually, we can put our own, let's say, security fences if we want, and we can try to balance the trade, but it's not going to be easy. So here I also believe that, and by the way, this year is, again, the first year when NATO has discussed China and has tasked also to prepare some security analysis. So the only way how to respond to such kind of challenges is to keep unity, to keep as much EU and NATO engaged as possible.
Thank you. Mrs. Pusić.
Let's see. It works. A few points that were made and a few things that you raised. I will start from the last point that you made, and this is how do you maintain sovereignty, especially relevant for Edgars and me, for small countries. With so many players meddling, I would say by encouraging as many players to meddle as possible, because sovereignty is, I think the concept of sovereignty has changed, and with the European Union, the concept of sovereignty for all of us, to some extent, has changed, but it has always been sort of a trade-off between sovereignty and, let's say, security and cooperation, etc. My experience is that for small countries, you cannot defend yourself, let's say, from other countries having influence, because they do. They invest, they appear in different forms, there's geopolitics, but the more the better, in a way, because it somehow balances itself out. The key problem is if you're somehow dominated by one big player. That is, I think, very unhealthy for sovereignty. Also, the United States has been certainly key for energy security for all of our countries. And this has been a very, very important. And in that sense, we are more similar than I think than you think at first glance, let's say. Especially in helping diverse sources, routes, and suppliers. But I think we need to bring into our discussion another elephant in the room, and that is the Russian Federation. We've been talking about China and cooperation with China. We've been talking about the United States and cooperation with the United States, which I think is the right thing to do because we have to think as European Union. But there is also a close neighbor, which is also a big player, and that influences all of this. And how the 3Cs initiative relates or deals with that neighbor, I think would also be an interesting issue.
Thank you. Let me open it up. I have already 2 hands, but I also want to make sure there is a woman who is going to ask a question to follow Nick's example. So, the gentleman up front here, can we have a microphone? Otherwise, I'll give you mine.
Jonathan Isle from the Royal United Services Institute in London. I agree with the Polish Foreign Minister that the initiative was not at all intended to somehow supplement or create a new structure in the European Union. Nevertheless, I think our Croatian colleague was right in suggesting that there was an element of suspicion at the beginning, the sort of not invented in Brussels kind of atmosphere to it. I think you have dispelled it. But the question is, do you conceive this structure as a structure which will affect the strategic thought of the European Union towards Russia? Or do you think that that instrument needs to be handled elsewhere?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting panel. Michał Baranowski, GMF Warsaw. One quick question to Ms. Pusić, because you mentioned the more the better. I mean, just wonder if you actually mean that we should welcome as much of Chinese and Russian meddling as much as shared sovereignty with our European partners and transatlantic partners. But to ministers, I mean, the 3Cs initiative is meant to produce actually effects on the ground, actual projects. So I wanted to ask you about low-hanging fruits that you are seeing ahead of the summit in Estonia, and what the US, if in this context, could do to help the initiative a little bit further. Thank you.
Okay, I don't have a woman, but I have a young person.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Ilya Kursenko. I'm a student from Kazan University, Russia. I came here thanks to the volunteering program that the Warsaw Security Forum has. It's an amazing opportunity to enhance confidence building and get engaged with the discussions on a high level for us young people to learn. My question is regarding the confidence building measures that exist in the countries of your region that can engage young people to look above the prejudices, propaganda, and look for the solutions above the level that caused the problems. Because I came here, feel like I've climbed over the new Iron Curtain that exists. It's an invisible curtain of propaganda and hate that is led by the current policymakers. And I see a lot of capacity in the young people who will come, and I feel responsible to live in the world where we don't see each other as opponents rather than as partners to cooperate. That's when I was born, was like that. Yeah.
Sorry. Please choose which question you want to answer. Nick Gowan is jumping up and down, wants me to end. So please, who wants to go first?
Well, just very quick answers on 3 questions. 3Cs initiative as a kind of strategic counterbalance towards Russia. Well, I don't think that we can look at this as the kind of, let's say, another mechanism to address some of the challenges. We have different organizations and formats. However, one thing that I just mentioned in my introductory remarks, that if this initiative keeps United States closer to Europe, keeps it engaged in not only military sense, but also on energy, economy, and other senses, then it's already a good kind of, let's say, element. Second, on some practical issues and what we can expect from summit in Estonia. Well, for my country, actually, from what I'm reading, and quite unexpectedly, we have found that the best value added when it comes to the business side of this project is financial institutions, and we have specific financial institution Autumn that is actually working very well with the counterparts in the region. I would love to see more business activities. I would love to see more, and taking into account our great friends and neighbors in Estonia, they are so much obsessed with digital issues that I'm absolutely convinced they are going to put digital agenda as priority, and I would just welcome. On other issues, of course, this is not a very easy year for the United States as they are going through election cycle, but still continuous presence of high-ranking delegation in this region next year would be very much welcome. And very quick answer on the propaganda and propaganda Iron Curtain. I think that your presence here is actually the best way how to handle those issues from both sides, and I would really encourage public diplomacy events, more students from Russia coming to Europe, and actually also more projects where European students, European youth would be able to travel to Russia, and probably that would be the way how you could address some of those issues and preparing for policy making phase when you are reaching the status of minister, prime minister or president.
Thank you. Mrs. Pusić, maybe you want to, or Minister Czaputowicz, please.
I think yes. As far as the relations with Russia is concerned, definitely the countries of the region will continue to influence European Union policy vis-à-vis Russia, but through other instruments. First of all, Foreign Affairs Council, we discussed that issue. We discussed about prolongation of sanctions. We do not use the 3 Cs as a form of organizations of the position concerning our foreign policy. On Thursday and Friday, Federica Mogherini will be in Minsk, Belarus, in order also to demonstrate support for sovereignty of Belarus with the foreign ministers from countries or representative of ministers from other countries or European Union. So it is an example of this activity. I would not connect 3 Cs to foreign policy. Particularly, Russia should not be afraid and counter-react because only EU member states belong to that, not the countries who apply for that. And we have another instrument to help these countries. This is Eastern Partnership. 10th anniversary we celebrated this year. Now we are at the stage of the development strategy for next years, and indeed in Minsk discussion will be about Eastern Partnership. As far as the United States are concerned, I'm not sure if I have understood your question correctly, but of course Poland is pro-American in a sense that for us as a member of the European Union, transatlantic relations are crucial, and we always defend within the European Union a strong transatlantic bond. But it is not because we belong to the 3 Cs initiative, because it is our position. I think it also refers to other countries of the region. So generally, these countries better understand policy of the United States than so-called old Europe. And it is also a good base for political cooperation. If there is also an opportunity to have more financial involvement of the United States or increase of trade, transfer of the technology, guaranteeing energy security, import of liquid gas, the better. But it is because of our position rather than the belonging to this initiative. And of course, propaganda is very important. There is a competition, at least, or some say that it's a war in cyberspace. It's a feature of our world, and we have to deal with that and develop a proper answer to that threat. But indeed, it's a very important issue.
Thank you. Mrs. Pusić.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me start with the more the better. The more the better, by the more the better, I didn't mean have one country more projects in one of our countries, but having as many different potential investors or countries present with a full conscience that it's still within the European Union. The problem is when you start depending on one big player, if you're a small country, then that creates problems. What happens in reality? The 16 plus 1, or now 17 plus 1, but while it was still 16 plus 1, China got won a contract to build a big bridge in Croatia, which is 80% financed by the European Union. We have to think about that. It won fair and square, everything's fine and wonderful, but none of us want to become dependent on one of the big players from outside. I don't see European Union as a threat in that sense. I see that as us. But everybody else I see as partners. I don't see European Union as partners. I think European Union is us. And then with partners, I think we need to play and we need to do business and everything, being aware that there is this difference. Role of the young people, and at the same time the let's say information or propaganda wars. We certainly, all of us here on the stage, and I think a lot of people in the audience, remember the time not so long ago when, for instance, Russia and European Union were not in a propaganda war. And where in Russia you didn't have propaganda war against the European Union. We also all remember that until relatively recently, part of every NATO ministerial or NATO summit was the NATO-Russia Council, where Russian either president or foreign minister was sitting at the table and we talked about the common issues or common problems. This looks very difficult or far-fetched maybe from today's perspective, but this was maybe 5-6 years ago. We still had that. So maybe we should start thinking in those terms, because the old rule, better to talk than not talk and then risk fighting, I think still holds.
Thank you all so much for your contribution. I kind of feel we covered a lot of ground. There's certainly the agenda for the next summit in Estonia. I like that you said, it's actually more fun being involved in foreign politics at the moment. It's not so boring. So I think you all have your work cut out. Please join me in thanking the panel for spending some time with us. And I give it over to Nick.